we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, host of the LEO First Podcast, and welcome to another episode. Today, we are going to hear from a person that has experience in law enforcement, private sector, security, and we're going to learn how he has transitioned from these different roles. And I could tell you, based on stuff we've talked about leading into this conversation today, he's going to teach you a lot of different things, because he's taught me some things I didn't even know, just on the tech side. But when you guys listen and hear, make sure you think about some of the experience that you're going through as well, because one of the things we always want on this show is for people to understand that you can be whatever you want to be. You don't have to be tied down to your uniform. Not saying go quit your job, because we never want you to do that, because you got to pay bills, but you're always going to be a person, no matter if you have a uniform on or not. And this person that we have on today, he definitely exemplifies that. He's moved around. He definitely has a slew of experience that we can all relate to, or some of us dream of having. But regardless of where you're at, remember, there's always more that you can do. There's not just one thing you have to be tied down to. Now, without me rambling anymore, we're going to introduce our guest today, which is Burke Brownfeld. And I almost messed up. And we talked about this in the green room about saying Brownfield during Brownfeld, but it is Brownfeld, guys. He didn't miss the I. There is no I in there in the second part of his last name. But Burke, tell us about you.
Thank you. Yeah, as long as it starts with a B and sounds kind of close, I'm good with it.
Good.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And anytime I can get in front of, especially folks in the public safety space, it really means a lot to me. And yeah, as you said, my career started right out of college as a police officer. In my hometown, I only applied to one police department, Alexandria, Virginia. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia, and I wanted to be a police officer in the place that I grew up. It was like very personal for me. And then I was just very fortunate from there to be able to live in Latin America, doing security work for the Peace Corps, and later worked for the Washington D.C. Metro system, doing security for them. And then eventually found myself in the private sector doing corporate security work. But I still try. I'm still so passionate about the public safety side. So I also helped found a company called Guardian Score, where we work directly with police departments still. So I'm always trying to keep my hands in the pot, in the public safety side, because I'm still really believe, that's where it all started for me. And I'll never fully move on from that. There's always a part of my heart that's still inside of public safety.
Yeah. And you said something. So you grew up wanting to be a police officer. So do you remember a certain moment, or was it just the environment you were in? Like, what kind of pushed you into the direction of law enforcement? Because not everybody gets pushed in that direction. Yeah,
for sure. It's funny because, growing up, no one in my family had been a police officer. No one. My dad is a journalist. My mom is a writer. They're, both very academic. My mom, writes novels. So you can imagine the reaction when I said, oh, you know what I want to do?
Yeah.
That was not that well received. So now later they were very proud of it once they saw me do it and understood why I wanted to do it and all that. But, the funny thing is like, in some ways it happened a little bit accidentally, in the sense that I have a July birthday. And so, when
July
everyone
what?
else was turning
July what?
July 24th.
Okay, I'm at the 30th.
So
I'm
I'm a
at
Leo.
July 30th. So
I'm a Leo.
I'm 6 days after. So I was right there. So
Okay, gotcha. So I was in one of those situations where everyone else was turning 16 and could work in the summertime, and I couldn't. I was like, had that birthday where it was like, I can't get a real job and pay because I was only 15. And so at the time I'm 15, summer starts, and I said to my mom, well, I'd like to do a volunteer job because I can volunteer. I just can't be, get a paid job. So we had this book in Alexandria. It was a volunteer book. It was red, thick book at the time. This is before, the internet really was a real thing.
yeah.
And we went through all the volunteer opportunities, just page by page. Okay, you could volunteer at the hospital, you could volunteer at the fire department, you could volunteer all these different places all over the city. And I came to the police department and I was like, oh, well, that sounds pretty cool. I'm 15 years old. Like, that sounds really neat. I could just volunteer at the police department. So I did it. And so I didn't know I knew nothing about the police prior to that because I had no family members to learn it from or, nothing like that. And so I showed up and I was assigned to the property and evidence room. And those people, it was like a second home for me. Like, I just started soaking up things. I started to go on ride-alongs at the age of 15. And I just started to see what it was like to just like drive around the city. And I'm like, I can't believe these guys get paid to do this. Like, to me, it was just like amazing, and
Yeah.
eventually they had to start being like, Burke, you can't come out all the time. Like, you got to go to
Slow yourself
school.
down. Slow it down a little bit.
Exactly. Go do your homework, man. Like, you can't be with us all the time. But I just got that itch right then. It's like, man, this is a job. And I remember thinking at a young age, I would do this job for free. Like, this is a job I don't need to be paid. And so I just had that. It stuck with me. And I volunteered at the police department all the way through college. And up until the point I graduated them, I was already in the hiring process, senior year of college, just waiting to get back so I could start. I was just eager, just hungry for it.
Yeah, always. So it's interesting because, like you said, you maintain that passion, especially with Guardian Score and going to Latin America, doing different things within the law enforcement realm. You never really left it private sector. Like, although private sector still have a lot of ties to it. When
Sure.
you were going through these different phases, especially in high school, of just seeking out like this passion, how do you think it's changed like nowadays? Because it's not a secret. You don't have to have a top secret clearance to know this. You don't have to be in an FBI like secret room to know this, but staff shortages are very rough in law enforcement. Have you ever thought like what we can do in law enforcement to kind of get people re-engaged with just jumping back into the industry or just having that passion to start it again? Because obviously you did something that probably not a lot of people do, as far as like seeing where the volunteer first. But what have you ever thought about, or do you think about strategies to kind of improve the industry in that manner?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's like the $1 billion question right now, And luckily with the work that we do with Guardian Score, we talk a lot with police chiefs as
Yes.
well, about their struggles that they have. And I think a lot back about when I first started as a police officer, like you said, in a completely different age. That was before body worn cameras existed. It
Yeah,
was
me too.
that was also, you know, when it was more the warrior mentality. I mean, that's what we were trained on, right? You go out and be a warrior, those
Yes.
types of things. And I wasn't trained, now I'm like obsessed with the concept of empathy and how to use empathy in policing. So I didn't even know what empathy was. It's not like I didn't get trained in any of that. I remember at the time we would have, it was probably like a 1 hour block of training of hey, just in case, let's say you get the wrong guy and you have him at gunpoint and he's on the ground and turns out to be the wrong guy. This is how you kind of dust him off and send him on his way. I remember that was like a 1 hour block of instruction or something. And that was kind of like how you understood how to treat people, with respect or whatever. And I still remember hearing that session, but it was so isolated the way we talked about that, of like how to treat people.
Correct.
And then it's like you learn it on the street, of course. You see what works, what doesn't work. You understand how to build rapport. But I didn't feel like I had gotten necessarily the training on it. But going back to your original question, I still think when I think back on my time as a police officer, and people will ask me, over the years. Like, you get into a job interview and they're like, what's your proudest professional accomplishment? My answer always is a story from being a police officer. So the thing that I want people to realize that are both in policing now and maybe even considering policing, or people that rejected policing as an option, like, oh no, I don't want to be the police. My request is hear me out, which is that I'm not sure you can find another job in this world where you get the opportunity all day long to directly impact another human's life in the same way that you can as a police officer. So yes, you can make more money elsewhere.
Of course.
You can be part of things that are like more macro level. You can say, oh, well, I want to get involved in foreign affairs, et cetera. And that's all cool. Like, you want to go to the private sector, that's cool, right? Yeah, go make a lot of money, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when you think back, you got to think ahead, right? Like, when I'm 50 years old, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, and I'm telling stories to my children and grandchildren, I'm thinking, what have I done with my life? For me, I always go back to my time as a police officer, because those are the real moments, like the real opportunities that you have to make a difference in a person's life, even if they're very small, very short, but they're real, they're raw. You get an insight into just how the world and humans function. You get a backstage pass to life. And you can't get that almost anywhere else. It's a very rare, unique opportunity. So is it hard? Yes. Is it different today? Absolutely. Right. It's a very different environment.
Of course.
But that part has not changed. Right. That part, in my opinion, is still very, very true, is that there's still always that opportunity as a police officer to have an unbelievable opportunity to just connect with other people, regardless of race, class, religion, socioeconomic status. And man, sometimes you could just change their day, right? Like, if you think back, like, where else are you going to get situations where someone might walk up to your car and say, hey, I'm thinking of killing myself? That's not normal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's not, yeah, no,
right?
but they know what car to walk up to.
Right. They approach you, and that's so it's like, that's just one of thousands of moments as a police officer where it's like, what an honor that you get a chance to try to save someone or improve someone's day or stop someone from going down this pathway and help them redirect to this pathway. Yeah, it's not like you're necessarily a miracle worker, right? Because life can be hard for certain people, especially when you get into mental health and addiction and those kind of things. So there's also a lot of, you see some people make the same mistakes over and over and over again. But every day you get a chance to be part of it. And most jobs don't give you that chance. So that's what I would like to kind of remind people, is like, even a lot of the folks that I worked with over the years are like, oh man, you got out at the right time. And I'm thankful for the opportunities that I've had. I wouldn't change a thing, but at the same time, I wouldn't change a thing. I would never, ever give up my time that I had as a police officer, because I never would have gotten to where I am today if I hadn't started there.
You're so right. And when I look at my trajectory, I spent time as a police officer, Border Patrol, corrections. The one thing I think I would have changed, and one thing I think I would like every law enforcement officer, kind of like everybody that wants to have long-term success in the career, and if they want to hit every level, I would definitely recommend for everybody to be in corrections at one point, whether it's a county jail, the state prison, the federal prison, because for starters, that shows you how to communicate to people without an actual like physical weapon. The only weapon you have is between your ears. That's the only thing you have. Then elevate to a police officer, a deputy sheriff, something else that maybe has a uniform on. Then at that point, maybe go into investigations, maybe like FBI, DEA, ATF, and then maybe do something that's at a leadership level. And you don't have to have the federal side, but I think that everybody that I have felt and seen that's been pretty effective, they've been either in corrections or a street police officer or deputy at one point, because you're right. There's really no way to replicate those activities. Even if you're a federal agent, like if you're FBI, you've never dealt with people in a sense of going to their house and helping them learn how to get out of a domestic violence situation. That's just not your role. Like, your job is to investigate. If you're DEA, you may not be looking at the mental wellness of the person that you're arresting for drugs. ATF, like, you're just not like, there's violence there, there's weapons there, but did you know that that person was in a car crash that you had to deal with 6 months ago? So I agree with you. Like, that just being a police officer at that ground level is so fulfilling that even now, like, those are usually those tend to be the bulk of the stories or the bulk of the incidents that I'm able to relate to, because it's just so personable. Is that kind of like how you, I know you made it, but that's kind of like, is that how you felt like it's been, like, you always tie a lot of your life experiences back from your time working for the PD?
Oh, yeah, quite a bit, for sure, quite a bit. And it's in ways that I don't even know sometimes why I'm able to, wait, oh, why am I not stressed out about this right now? It's like, oh, because I learned how to handle this as a cop, And I think those are other things that, as we think about ways that people can prepare themselves to sell themselves for future career opportunities, it's important. I think being a police officer can be so crazy and so chaotic, and it's like a grab bag of everything, right? Like, even though that sounds overly simplistic, but it's kind of like, you just get a little bit of everything that's possible in life, and that's what you see all day long, right? Except for very specialized policing environments. But if you're like a city police officer, you're gonna get just a little bit of everything. And you're gonna start to learn stuff that you didn't even want to learn, because you're gonna be like, oh, there's an issue with fraud at the local supermarket, and they're gonna bring you behind into the warehouse portion of the supermarket, and you're gonna be like,
what is this?
Oh, I didn't know this is how you stored vegetables before. I mean, it's all, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's hundreds of moments like that where you just start getting exposed to how things work. You just start to become an expert, right? Of like, oh, there's something behind that. There's another thing behind that thing that makes this thing work. And so those little pieces of wisdom, not everybody has. And I think we forget, because we surround ourselves often with other police officers that kind of get that stuff. And we forget that we've had a unique opportunity to understand life and the way life works differently, and to include, now granted, not all cops are good at this, but it's like every job, but to include managing your emotions under immense stress.
Yes.
That is something that many, many, many people are not equipped with. And now that can be, of course, accomplished. I don't want to say it's only in police, right? Your military, fire department, paramedics, et cetera, right? But it's a unique subset of people that have that opportunity to repeatedly be pushed to make decisions under very high stress, and make them, as effectively as they can, quickly weigh risks, and boom, I'm going to do this right now. But got to stay calm, got to think through it, got to communicate. That's a very marketable, important skill, but we have to be able to talk about it. We have to be able to know that we have that skill and express it to people, right? But I wanted to ask you something, going back to what you said, because I think that was very important, what you said about corrections. And this is something, again, that I think people can market themselves on this if they have it, which is when you said in corrections, when someone doesn't have a weapon, for example, and now they're in a scenario where you're also outnumbered, the ratio is not in your favor, right? And so now it's a different question of different skills that you may use in order to build rapport, or even like, I need compliance from someone, say, in a certain situation.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to get there? So I want to hear from you for a second. Like, what are some of those skills that do get developed in that correctional environment that then are very useful after that?
For me, the very first skill, and that's been the one that I've been using more consistent. I mean, I always used it, but I really emphasize this very specific one, was respect. Realizing that no matter what they are done, you're there in a role to make sure they get what they have coming. In a sense of, if you're supposed to let them out the cell at 8 a.m., you let them out, because that's what the policy says. If they're supposed to get fed, you're supposed to make sure there's food available. And that's what it is. You're not there to judge them. You're there to sit. You're there to protect them. You're there to serve them. because it's just like any other citizen. Yeah, they commit a felony and some are extremely heinous, but even those folks that you see, and we'll talk about, let's say, for example, people that has crime against children. One of the sides that I never looked at when I was a police officer, and now I look at a little bit more now, is a lot of these individuals have their own versions of mental illness. And sometimes we don't take that view. And I know it's something that you started to talk about, especially in law enforcement, is the empathy side of what goes on with that person. Sometimes we don't look at the whole picture of a person's life story. We say, oh, he or she molested a child. Now we need to put him under the jail. That is 100% true. And not saying they shouldn't go under the jail, but how did they get to that point? And I think that's the next layer of law enforcement and corrections. You see it because you know their story and you see how they function every day versus maybe a police officer or an investigator. You're only going to see that person maybe once or twice. In investigators, you're only going to see them long enough to figure out what crime they committed, but you may not actually know their lifestyle and the family that they don't have, the education that they don't have, the resources that they don't have versus a person that's not doing that stuff. Once again, that does not make any of it acceptable. However, you have to look at the other side. So it starts off with respect, but then you go into the empathy side and you start trying to put it all together. So I know for you, that's one of the things you focus on in law enforcement is the empathy view of it. So how did you actually get to that point to where you said, you know what, it's very important for me to start bringing this to the forefront for law enforcement?
Yeah, it's funny because empathy, when I reflect on it, I realized that empathy was extremely important to me as a police officer, but I didn't know at the time really what empathy was. I was just doing things and I was getting feedback, but I didn't know to call it empathy, and it wasn't part of my like intentional strategy. It was just over time you start to realize, just like I'm sure in all these corrections or for other officers that have done the same, like you start to realize, okay, this is just going to make me better at my job. It's going to make me, say if it's like I need compliance, I'm going to get compliance easier if I just treat this person with respect, or I hear them out for a second before I ask them to mark a command at them, those types of things. Something that's becomes obvious over time to you just with enough experience, whereas you come out the gate as a rookie officer and you're like, get on the ground or put your hands around, because you it's not real for you yet. The human interaction piece isn't real. So you come out and you say, I've got a badge and I'm in charge, and therefore that person's going to just listen to me. It's like, well, some people might listen to you and other people might say, why should I do that?
Yeah.
And you better be ready to adjust quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously I got better and better at it over time, but to go into it, so like to tell my empathy story, because it led to a lot of things for me. It contributed a lot to starting Guardian Score, because that's a lot of what we do with Guardian Score is about measuring procedural justice, and procedural justice directly links into empathy. When you think about what procedural justice really is. And so, but if we rewind a little bit further back, like everything, people will be like, oh man, you helped start this company, Guardian Score. Yeah. But I couldn't have done that without being a police officer. I never wouldn't. So again, it goes back to the value that you can derive from being a frontline police officer or frontline public safety. I don't want to just say police. You can get a lot of the same skills.
Anything that's on the ground.
Exactly. But I remember now I left policing in 2010. Sworn policing. At the Metro, I was doing a civilian commander type role, but that was different. But in 2013, I'm sitting at George Mason University in an auditorium, and I'm listening to a guy. His name is David. He's speaking to the audience, and this is about like second chances, basically, like a prison reform type stuff.
Right.
And he's telling a story about his first. He had battled with addiction. This is like when he's like 50 years old. He battled addiction. He'd been in and out of jail for his whole adult life. But he's telling the story of his first interaction with police, very first interaction. He's like 12 years old. And so I'm just sitting there listening. And he basically says, yeah, I was 12 years old. I'm walking down the street. I'm going to a store, like a little corner store. And I pass a friend of mine. And that friend of mine asked me if I had any money because he wanted to buy something. It was something like that, right? So I can't remember who did what, but one of them pulls out some coins from their pocket and gives it to the other one to purchase something, right? Right after that little exchange of the coins, undercover, unmarked cars pull up, police officers get out in plain clothes, put them at gunpoint. And so this guy, David, 12 years old,
Wow.
is on the ground, with the gun in his face, gets handcuffed, and they thought they saw a hand-to-hand transaction of drugs, right? So as it turns out, it wasn't, right? I mean, it was just, some innocent little thing, right? So they let him go. He didn't get arrested. They realized, oh, okay, it wasn't what we thought it was, right? And then he says, on stage, he's like, everything in that point's making sense to me. I'm like thinking as a cop, like, okay, yeah. I mean, they thought that's what that was, but then they realized it wasn't, so they let him go. They uncuffed him, like, hey man, go ahead, go home.
Right.
And then he says, and then I went home and found my mom, and I cried in her arms. And I'm like, I didn't think about that part.
That's
I
the other
didn't
side of the
think
story.
about what
Yep.
it's like to be 12 and have a gun pointed in your face, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it gives me kind of like a shiver just to say that, to think, because I have kids, like,
Yeah.
what would that be like? Now, again, it's easy to judge this guy now because he went to prison and jail, a dozen times, 2 dozen times, whatever. And you think, oh, that guy's in the system. But at 12, he didn't know what that was. At 12, he hadn't had a gun pointed in his face. That was the
Right.
beginning for him. That was a starting point,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes. People don't know that
So
part. Mm-mm.
to me, when you hear the human side of it, to say that 12-year-old had a mother too, and that 12-year-old went home and cried to his mother, and you realize, I've been that cop. That's the moment I had about empathy. I've been that guy. And I'm not saying the cops did anything wrong. Like procedurally, they probably did everything, just by the book, right? Totally fine. But I've been that, as I was like, how many times did I do something like that and never really think about the impact of my actions, or never really think about what that person's going to go and tell their family, their friends
Right.
after the interaction, right? And that's what got me into this thing of like, what am I feeling right now? And I realized that it was empathy. I was trying to understand the perspective of the other side of the equation, right? So then I started to research empathy and try to figure out what empathy meant and really what it was, because a lot of us over confuse empathy and make it sound soft. Oh man, you're going soft. It's like, no, 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 that's not
Yeah.
what
No.
empathy is,
Yeah. But people
right?
do think that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion about what empathy is. And so then for me, I started to realize, okay, if we think of empathy, the most basic form of empathy, as people sometimes call perspective taking, that's real basic. I don't have to love you to take your perspective, right? I think about it like this. I've interviewed many people as a police officer that I did not respect their actions. To your point, said people that have committed rape, people that have murdered people. Doesn't mean I like them, doesn't mean I'm going to be friends with them, doesn't mean I'm going to go grab a beer with them. But there is benefit to me trying to understand their perspective. Because when it comes time to sit down, say at an interview table, and if I just, in my mind, I'm like, oh, you're this evil person that did these evil things. Now tell me what you did. Confess. That's not going
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah. It's never. You're not gonna get no
You're
answers.
you're not going to get where you need to go, right?
Correct.
So people start to think, oh, you want to be, oh, you want to give people hugs, free hugs. No, 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 no. Being empathetic will make you better at your job, first of all, because if we stop confusing empathy with sympathy, stop confusing empathy with love, etc., empathy can be very, very, very simple. Now, it's going to make you a better spouse, it's going to make you a better parent,
Correct.
all those things if you infuse empathy into your life. But the point is, it can be very simple also. And so when I started thinking about that, it's like, okay, when I teach empathy now to police officers, or even to corporate security folks, I just say, hey, look, it's the effort we make to put ourselves in another person's shoes. That's all it is. To really put empathy into action, that's all you have to do. And the reason I say it's the effort is because I'll never really understand what it's like to be in your shoes. I can't actually be in your shoes,
Yeah.
right?
Something you don't want to be in. I would
Yeah,
some of their lives. I don't want to do some of those things. I don't want
right,
to have the
right.
experiences. Let's just put you in the situation. I'm good.
Totally, totally. So I always tell people one of the most basic things you can do is just use your imagination, right? So you don't have to then, like, so someone who doesn't have a home, it's not like you have to go sleep under, outside at 3 a.m. to be able to empathize with them. You could just pause,
Correct.
slow down, and say, what would that be like? And just imagine, and I always use the coffee shop example because I'm a coffee fanatic, but I've never been a barista before, right? But I can walk into a coffee shop and see when the line is out the door and the barista's working alone and they're behind on orders. And I can watch and I can start thinking, man, I wonder what that's like. That's got to be stressful. That person's trying to take orders, make coffee at the same time, not make a mistake, deal with someone's complaint. Hey, you gave me whole milk instead of, skim milk, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll never know exactly what that's but literally just me pausing for 10 seconds and thinking, that's probably stressful, man. I would find that to be difficult. And you know what it does is it starts to impact the way I interact with them. Yes. So when I get to the front of the line, I'm a little more patient because I already use that empathy of like, I bet you this person's a little bit stressed. I don't know, but I bet you they're a little stressed because of the situation. So I'm going to be a little more patient, a little more kind, a little more appreciative. And so it starts to impact my action. So it's like one thing to try to look at their perspective. And the beautiful moment happens when it impacts your actions and the way you interact with that person. Because that's where, to me, the magic starts to happen. And you see it in policing, where it's like an example I always give with frontline police officers who at first will often be like, man, I don't want to hear about empathy. Okay, cool. Now let's imagine it's 3 a.m. You're working alone and you get dispatched to, say, a guy loitering in front of the 7-Eleven who won't leave. Okay. Let's say it's wintertime. Yeah. Wintertime and it's cold outside. You pull up, you're alone. You get out of the car, you see the guy, matches the description that you got, on the dispatch. And this guy's wearing a hoodie and his hands are in the hoodie pockets, right in front, right? That little section the hoodies have in the front.
Now we all put our hands in. Yeah. We all put our hands in.
Right. So let's say it's 40 degrees out, right? You get out of the car. You have 2 options, right? So almost any police officer in their mind is going to say, I need that guy to take his hands out of his pockets. You've been trained to do it. You want to see your hands, no question, right? How you get there is an opportunity for empathy. Because here's the thing. This guy may or may not be up to no good. You don't know, right? I mean, this guy might be waiting for a friend, whatever. Like the call is very vague, right? It's the guy loitering, right? Maybe waiting for an Uber for all I know. I don't know what this guy's doing. So the question becomes, as you're getting out of the car, I'm never asking people to put their safety at risk, right? I'm not like saying like someone's pointing a gun at you and you say, well, maybe they had a bad day. That's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to sacrifice procedure or sacrifice your life for empathy. That's not the point. But the point is, it's almost like using your situational awareness to gather all this information and quickly analyze it. So you see, okay, I know that it's cold out. I see the guy has his hands in the hoodie. Okay, well, given that it's cold out, but I know I need to get this guy's hands out of the pockets. Okay, so I know that's the outcome I want. Okay, I'm going to be outcome oriented. I want the hands out of the pocket. And now it's almost like, okay, empathy. What does empathy do? Okay, I'm going to go up and say, excuse me, sir. Hey, man, I know it's really cold out, but would you mind taking your hands out of your pockets for me just so I could see that you don't have any weapons? That is empathy. And the reason I'm saying something as simple as that is empathy is I took into account his perspective, which is I'm acknowledging that you might be cold. I'm acknowledging that by taking your hands out of your pockets, you're probably not going to be thrilled because you're using your pockets to warm yourself. But I'm letting you know why I need you to do that. And I'm recognizing your situation, right? Because as we know, 99% of the time, that guy doesn't have a gun in his hoodie waiting to shoot you, right? Yeah. Now you're going to have him take his hands out of his pockets because you're preparing for the 1%.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you need to treat them with a lack of respect or lack of empathy in the process, because you're still getting where you want to go. You're still going to get that guy to take his hands out. That's where you want to go. But by infusing a little dose of empathy into it, you're going to keep that guy calm. You're going to keep that guy feeling like he's got his dignity and respect in place. And now you can have a conversation. But as you know, we all know the officer that shows up and you start at an equilibrium between the officer and the person, right? Yes. The community member. And that officer has an opportunity to either diffuse or make the situation worse than it was. Absolutely. Right? And I think a lot of us want to always blame the other person. Oh, well, he shouldn't have resisted. Yeah, sure. On paper, of course, you shouldn't resist police.
Correct.
But we should self-reflect. What did I do to contribute?
What
What
led to
could
that?
I have done? Exactly. Could I have done something that would have actually made the situation calmer? And then I didn't, even if you don't care, I'm like, it'd be less paperwork. You don't have to go to the hospital. You get to go home on time. I mean, my thing is like, I'm not even trying to get you to be a nicer person. I'm trying to think practically speaking, first of all, in practical terms, if we start to think empathetically, things just go smoothly, right? Like things just work better. So there's just so many opportunities to actually put empathy into action in little teeny tiny ways throughout the day. And the side effect is people be like, man, that guy's really nice, which is great. Cool. I want you to be a nice person. I can't make you a nice person though.
Correct.
So what I can do is teach you how to use empathy in a way that's going to make you better at your job.
Yeah. And it's cool because when you explain the situation of just highlighting that it's cold and that you what you want to do, I mean, you're gonna, like you say, you're gonna get to that point no matter what. Like you need to have their hands come out. But same thing,
Right.
like we kind of mentioned in corrections, like even in the correctional setting, everybody you've dealt with, especially if you're on the federal or the state side, they're all convicted felons most of the time. So you're not their
Right.
first law enforcement encounter. Now in the streets,
Right.
that might be that 12-year-old's first time. That might
Sure.
be even that 35-year-old's first time. So you have to now think about, well, what else have they been through? So then you have to start thinking about, it's easier to take 10 seconds and slow down your thinking and say, okay, what else could be going on? And rephrase your questioning or your statement to understand that you could be the person that either elevates or the new phrase word that's out there, or de-escalate the situation. Right. Because it's usually it's a lot of times it's up to, I can tell you in the prison setting, a lot of time, 9 times out of 10, it's usually up to the officer on if it's going to go higher or lower, because
sure,
it's just the nature of the environment. But a lot of times inmates, felons, whatever you want to call them, parolee, whatever you want to call them, they don't want, from my experience, and this is just mine alone, most of them have told me, they was like, you know what? We're not trying to fight you. We already did the crime we wanted to do on the street. We're just trying to get home now. So a lot of us don't want to impact that in any way. However, when there's disrespect or a lack of empathy, it takes their mind back to what got them in trouble in the first place. And you think about it, you're like, oh, because people always say, oh, how'd you get this inmate to do that? I said, I just asked them with empathy or respect. I mean, I don't know. I realized that he's in here or she's in here for 24 hours a day. I go home after 8 hours or 16 hours. And I have to keep that in mind, that they know I'm going to tell them to do something. Like they know, everybody, both sides, the inmates and the staff, we all know the rules. So they know there's certain things, but it's always up to them to listen. Just like the person on the street, it's up to that person that has a hoodie on. He has to make that decision in your scenario to actually listen. And depends on how you approach him. If he is truly having a bad day and he's been waiting for one thing to set him off, if you come at him the wrong way without that empathetic mindset, then that's going to be what triggers that. Next you know, you're in a brawl on the hood of your car when you could have just took an extra 10 seconds and said, hey, man, you know, it's cold out, but I need to make sure you don't got any weapons. Let me take your hands out. Let me just pat you down real quick. This ain't going to take long. And most people, they're going to give that sigh like, oh, gosh, you're always harassing me, or what are you doing? But all right, go ahead, do it. And then boom, you do your thing and now you're safe. So you don't lose that safety, but taking those few seconds out happens. So usually when you're going through these sessions and you're coaching on empathy, what is if you know, or if you can recall, what is that usual aha moment when you finally have that breakthrough with that officer that you're talking about empathy, and they're like, you know what, Burke, I never thought about it like that. What is usually, is it usually after that scenario that you kind of have that aha moment, or is it like other parts of that coaching session that helps them realize that, you know what, maybe I should take the empathy side as well?
Man, that's a good question. I think it is. What I learned early on was it was on me as a trainer to make the material relatable to a frontline police officer. And so it's easy to talk about empathy in an abstract way, in an academic way. It's the same way we talk about procedural justice. It's easy to talk about procedural justice in a police academy. The real question starts to become, okay, but let me understand how I use it right now. If I walk out the door right now and I'm responding to a call, how am I going to use it? And so I noticed once we would go through several hands-on scenarios and really talk through them, and I like to be participatory, like, what would you do now? Now, what would you do? What if this guy said this? Now, what would you do? Mm-hmm. Then it makes it real. And also it's a reminder of like, my intentions are not bad, right? As a trainer, my intentions, I'm not here to be anti-police or anything like that. And I think that's part of it is, right? Like anytime you're giving a training where you're trying to ask people to think in a new way, doing some trust building is required, right? They've got to trust your intentions as a trainer, that you have their, that you have them in your mind with good intentions and not with some ulterior motive, right? And so one thing that I also like to do that I think I've noticed a lot of people will shift their thinking is like, I'll put up a picture of a guy that's in full, almost like SWAT gear. He's got like every tool you can imagine, right?
They do.
And
a lot of cool toys.
But what I say with that picture up there is like, to the point I made earlier, I'm not asking you to leave any of these tools at home. Show up ready to do your job. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking you to not do anything in particular, right? I'm not asking you like, oh no, don't shoot people, or don't pull out your pepper spray, or don't. That's not my point. That is not where I'm going. Point is, you have all these tools. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to shift your handcuff case a little bit to the left. I'm going to ask you to shift your pepper spray a little bit to the right. Now I want you to think of empathy as a tool. It's a physical thing. Think of it like the letter E that you can grab onto. I want you to put it on your belt. It's just sitting there like every other tool, right? I'm not saying just like you show up to a call, you're not going to pull out your baton every time. You're going to pull it out at the right moment for the right situation, for the right reasons, right? Same thing with your pepper spray. You're going to make a use of force decision based on the situation at hand, right? And everyone has their own use of force policy and training, et cetera. Empathy can function the same way. So empathy can sit there. It's just available to you, mm-hmm. right? Sometimes you won't have time. The conditions won't be correct for it. You won't go for that tool. But sometimes they will be. And sometimes you can use it in combination, right? You see someone's really amped up, they're riled up. You're like, okay, this might not go well. Okay, what do I have available to me, right? And we do this intuitively, right? Because we know all of our, you know how it is. You could close your eyes and reach for all your tools without even thinking, because it's like muscle memory.
Absolutely.
Empathy can sit there in the same way, so that if you build it into your communication style and your thought, in the way, your mindset of like, okay, this person's really upset. Give you like a real example that I'm sure many people can identify. You show up somewhere. You've got a guy that has a warrant for his arrest. You know that this guy has to go to jail. It just is what it is, right? Like, they've got a warrant. The end result needs to be that he goes to jail. Okay. Yeah. So that's that desired outcome. How you get there, again, is largely up to you as the police officer. So let's say the guy's animated. He's upset. He doesn't know why you're there. He doesn't even know yet that you know that he has a warrant, right? You're having that discussion, etc. Let's say he has a 5-year-old daughter standing next to him, right? He's already tense because of whatever situation. Let's say it was a domestic violence call that had no offense, but you had to respond to it, but then you run his name and he's got a warrant. Okay, right. Now I got to take the guy, right?
It happens.
Okay, totally. So here's where empathy comes in. The guy's already amped up. You know that you got to take him to jail, but his daughter is standing right next to him. If I use my imagination for a second and put myself into his shoes, or try to imagine, how would I feel if my 5-year-old daughter saw me get arrested in front of her? Probably bad, right?
Yeah.
Probably this guy's already upset. So the question starts to become, how can I get the same outcome? I'm going to put it this way. I'm going to get where I need to get to.
Yeah.
But I'd rather get there without using force. I'd rather get there with compliance, et cetera, and everyone goes home safe, uninjured. So in my mind, I could say, okay, I bet this guy is not going to want me to do this in front of his daughter.
Probably not.
All right.
Most people won't.
So that's it. That was the empathy part right there. That was empathy, right? Just that moment. But sometimes we have to reach for it for a second. Okay, let me think for a second. Because you probably have time, right? You got, oh, okay, 10-4. Yeah, I understand. It's warrant confirmed. Go. Okay. Now you're thinking for a second. All right, I'm going to have to get this guy in handcuffs. Empathy. Grab your empathy real quick. Put on the okay. All right, let me think about how this is going to go. How is he going to receive this information? That's empathy. It's as simple as that. I took his perspective into account. So then, right, what a lot of officers would be like, hey, man, do you mind if we talk over here for a second?
Right.
All you did was create space, right? Removed him from, the visual space of the daughter. And then at least, or even just earshot, say, hey, man, we got a warrant for you. I don't want your daughter to have to see that, right? Could we step outside and talk and, so that your daughter doesn't. Think about how many people will show gratitude towards you.
Yeah, because they know, more likely they know they have a warrant too. They're not, most people aren't surprised. Right. They're like, oh yeah, right. I forgot I didn't pay that, or you know what? Yeah, I do have that, whatever violation.
Right. But so you can suddenly take a situation where that guy might have fought you, physically fought you, if you tried to do that without any warning, right? Like, hey man, turn around, put your hands behind your back, and his daughter's standing right there. That same person might physically fight you, or that same person, if you show him dignity, respect, and empathy, pull him aside, might be like, hey man, I appreciate you. Thank you for doing that. That's not real. People like to talk about people being good and evil and all that. As you alluded to before, most people are just people. A lot of people make bad mistakes and make bad decisions that are wrong. But, and I'm going to say the thing I'm sure you know about the Charles Ramsey story. At the end of the day, humans have needs, and we have to consider what those needs are. And that's, again, part of the empathy. What are the needs of this person emotionally, mentally, et cetera? And when we start to meet those needs, now, unless they're in the middle of a mental health crisis or super high on drugs, where they're just not able to understand what's going on.
That's an asterisk. That's the asterisk.
Yeah, that's an exception, right? I understand that, and that's a different game. But under these scenarios, most likely that person's going to react like, wow, okay, I appreciate that you're doing that for me. Okay. And so going back to Charles Ramsey, one of the best stories I've ever, and I use this in my trainings oftentimes, is like Charles Ramsey tells a story where he says, and he heard it from, I think, a sergeant that he had work for him. It's like, every child, tell me if you heard this, every child is born a perfect 10 out of 10, right? You're a human, you enter into the world with 10 points. Okay. Now, let's say there's no father in your life. Oh, sorry, now you're a 7, right? You just lost 3 points. Okay. All right. Now, your single mom, works 3 jobs. Oh, lost 2 more points because mom's not at home. So you're fending for yourself. Oh, you live in public housing. You lost another point. And slowly you lose point. There's no one at home to help you with your homework. You have to figure it out on your own. You lost another point. And so suddenly the deck is stacked against you, right? Like all the things that maybe the kids at school have that you don't have, they got to keep at an 8 or 9, right? Like they've got all of these opportunities and things that are just built into their lives. But slowly you lost everything, right? Oh, your brother deals drugs or whatever. Like that's what you're exposed
that's reality.
To. Okay?
That might be the reality.
And that is real for a lot of people. But Charles Ramsey's point, which I think is the most important part, is, and I know this is an oversimplification, but it's an easy way to understand how people have certain environmental factors that slowly make their lives harder and harder and harder, and there's less to grab onto, right? Yes. But Charles Ramsey's point is, you get down to 1 point. Everyone gets to keep 1 point. And the 1 is your respect and dignity. So the thing that Charles Ramsey says is, if you're a police officer, you better know that every person you interact with, if sometimes they've only got that 1 point left, and that 1 point is their dignity, you better not try to take their dignity. Because if you take their dignity, they're left with nothing. And so therefore, you better be ready to fight them hard if you're taking their dignity. So that, and I'm sure that translates well into corrections, right? You got nothing.
Yeah.
You're stuck. You can't leave the place. What do you have? What do you have? Well, sometimes you might have your dignity, right? And so if we can keep that in mind, that we can't ever overestimate the importance of showing respect to people, because sometimes that's the only thing they've got left. They've got no money to their name. They've got no job. They've got no credit. They've got no family, right? all those things. But if you show them respect and dignity, that has value to them. Whereas if you show them no respect and try to rob them, that, oh, you might be getting into dangerous waters without even realizing it.
Yeah. And it's part of the show is letting officers know, or people that are looking at being officers or civilians, whoever's watching it or listening, is when it boils down to it, this comes to being a person in or out of the uniform. Like empathy doesn't just, you don't have to have an empathy mindset, or you don't have to have respect for somebody because you're wearing a uniform and they aren't, or
right,
vice versa. This is just normal people stuff that we're talking about. We're not making up something that's new. But if anybody we deal with, if we just remember, if we do anything with them, if we treat them with dignity and respect, and understand that there's always something else going on, minus the, like you said, the drugs or the mental health crisis,
sure,
that it takes you far in your life, even yourself. Like, always remember, if you think you don't have anything, if you're going through a traumatic incident right now as an officer, if you don't have anything, you can maintain your own dignity and respect. If you felt like your job's been stripped of you, if you felt that people have looked down on you, people talked about you, you didn't get that promotion, whatever it might be, at the end of the day, the one thing you can control for even yourself is maintaining your dignity and respect. And that's by showing it and displaying it and maintaining your own. You may not always get it back. Let's understand that's real too. Just how you put on that uniform and that's the first thing another person will take because they don't see you as a human, but you have to understand that you're the human inside of that. And that dignity and respect, that's I love that. I've heard of Charles Ramsey, but I never heard about that scoring and how it correlates so much, because you're right. Because even if you take it down to the prison setting, like sometimes that's all an inmate has. That's why they value it. That's why they're willing to die for it. That's why they're willing to fight you to the death, knowing that they're going to lose in the long run. Because, in the prison setting, you fight an officer, it ain't like you're getting out all of a sudden. It ain't like you're going to fight the officer and next thing you know, you got freedom. If you fight that officer, your life in that prison setting is going to become more worse than what it is already. So
yes,
a lot of times when you are fighting, if it's not drug induced or mentally induced, it tends to come down to respect, like literally respect and dignity. So I think, yeah, Burke, you definitely hit it on the head. I can see how it can correlate to everything, not just maybe being a police officer or corrections, but just life in general. But just taking it back to us being people. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Totally.
Now, when you were going from, and I wanted to make sure we touched on it before it got too much later into the show. You went from being law enforcement and you didn't go into the private sector directly, so to speak. You actually went into Peace Corps down in Latin America.
Yes.
How did that come about? Because I don't really talk to a lot of people that have done that, especially for several years. Like you've done it. Like how did you go from being in a PD to Peace Corps? Like how was that transition or that process?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about trying to help and mentor and coach people public safety, because I didn't really have a mentor to turn to. I didn't really know what to do.
A lot of us,
Hey,
that's a lot of us.
Yeah, so it's like, and I appreciate the stuff that you do, right? Because you're providing a service and somewhere people can learn from as well. When they're going through these processes, because I didn't feel like I didn't really know who to talk to about it, and I was in that interesting situation where it was almost like I quit while the going was good. I loved being a police officer, but I also had a lot of interests, like just other interests, and wanted to explore the world and just try other things, And my wife at the time, she had grown up abroad, and we had talked a lot about, hey, it'd be interesting to live in another country and experience another culture, another language, etc. And so we just started looking at different options, and the option that kind of worked best for both of us was this option at the Peace Corps, because I was able to work in their security team. So it was still like I worked a lot with the national police of different countries where I was. So I still worked in that realm, but I didn't carry a gun or badge. And then so this opportunity came up. They guaranteed the location. That was a big thing, right? So you look at all the federal jobs. So I applied to diplomatic security, et cetera, but you don't know really, it's like you're putting your name in the Powerball, like,
You don't know where
and
I'm
then
going now.
whatever country pops out, right? Whereas Peace Corps, they were like, hey, here's the job: Lima, Peru. You'll cover South America and the Caribbean. So that way I could talk to my wife, like, hey, are we cool with that? Yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that that was a really great experience. And it was, even though it wasn't going to the private sector, the big shift for me was not being a sworn police officer anymore. That was a mental shift. And that's
Yeah.
one thing that I always like to help maybe mentally prepare people for, is like, no matter how ready you feel you are to not be the police, the moment you are not the police, it will hit you in another way.
It will.
Right. And for me, before, now it was a little easier for me because we moved to another country. So like, if you're a tourist, whatever, you always like kind of shed that police persona when you're in another place, because you
Right.
like, hey, I'm nobody here. I'm just Joe Schmo tourist, right?
I just got my passport. I just got my passport last week. I don't know what y'all talking about.
Right. So that made it a little easier for me. But I still remember, before I deployed to South America, I caught a kid shoplifting at the CVS around the corner from my house. And I was I was like feeling totally great about not being, like, cool, I'm ready for this other job. It's awesome. Like, this is gonna be an adventure, right? The moment I saw this kid shoplifting, I'm like, oh, now I'm mad because I can't do anything. You know what I mean? Like, because it was in the same city. Ordinarily I would have pulled out my badge. Hey man, put that back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now I felt like a nobody, right? And then that's a struggle that a lot of people have to deal with, is that,
Right.
And something that I think is important to honor as well when you are a police officer. It's hard to remember how big of a deal it is when you're given that badge and given the level of authority that you have as a police officer. That is an honor that very, very few people are qualified to have or able to do it responsibly. When you have the power over someone's freedom, etc., that's a big deal. And you forget it when you just do it because you're a police officer. But when you don't have it, you're like, oh man, this is a different experience. So it requires some mental and emotional preparation for that change. But what I learned quickly, what I wanted to say about that is, when I got to the Peace Corps, I remember still having the police mentality, which was, okay, well, I may not be a police officer, but I'm in the security unit. So what I say is basically, that's the rule. Like, you'll do it. You know what I mean?
Definitely police officer mindset. Yes. We are taught that a lot. Yeah.
It's black and white, right? This is the this is the law. This is the whatever. Like, do it.
Yeah.
I'm right. You're wrong. Hey, like, that's kind of,
where's the question?
Right?
Where's the question at? Like, I don't understand the question at this point, guys. Like, where are we going? Where are we going with this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I got to the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps, my job was to help protect young American volunteers all over, Latin America. These are like 22 to 28-year-olds, very independent people. The fact that they even wanted the Peace Corps means they don't need a lot of structure. They're ready to go live on their own in a small town somewhere. So here I am coming in with the police mindset of like, okay, these are the transportation rules. You're only allowed to go on this bus, and this bus. You have to be home by this time. You have to call us by this, all these things, right? Yeah. And when people would not do it, in my mind, I was like, I could only think punitively, right? Because that's my back. Oh, okay, what are we going to do to them for that?
Yeah.
Right? And quickly, I realized, oh, okay, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not a cop anymore. This actually is not an effective. And what I learned, not just like a year ago, a buddy of mine named Steve Antoine, corporate security guy, but he used to be a police officer in Virginia as well, started in policing. Mm-hmm. And he told me this saying, which is, this is where it applies to anybody, not just cops, anybody. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? And I always am challenging myself with that now for any decision that I make. Police officers get to be right whenever they want, basically. Oh, okay, the law says you can't do this, so I'm right. I'm telling you that was against the law.
Yeah.
Right?
Pretty easy. Yeah.
But the question becomes, if you want to be effective, which is like, for example, I know you violated the law, and now I need to talk you into handcuffs. All right, now who cares if I'm right? Now I need to figure out a way to make this work for both of us, right? So being right and effective are not at all the same thing. And so I learned that feeling in the Peace Corps of like, I've got all these policies and procedures, but no, people aren't following them. Okay, so I might be right on paper, but I'm not effective. How do I get to be effective? How do I get people to do those things? Okay, now it gets into things like training, mentoring, coaching, fostering an environment where people make good decisions, all those types of things. And that takes a lot more effort than just being right. Oh, okay, well, look at policy 3.3. Well, that's easy. That's like the low-hanging fruit is, the policy is meaningless if people don't follow it. So I love to challenge myself and challenge others. And again, it goes from policing to any job of like, it's easy to be right, but it's a lot harder to be effective.
So with that, now you went from being a police officer, Peace Corps, then you get to Guardian Shield.
Score.
Gosh,
Guardian Score.
I keep thinking of this. I was dealing with somebody that said Burning Shield on their platform, and I was thinking talking about them yesterday. So Guardian Score. So now you get the Guardian Score, and you've taken a lot of this experience, like maybe not directly, but at least building yourself up. And now, what are you doing specifically with Guardian Score? Because I wanted to make sure we highlight that before we end it. Like we're getting close.
Sure.
But to tell us about, because Guardian Score once again is directly related to like the law enforcement, first responder world. What are you doing if someone was like, "Hey, tell us about what that is"? Like in a nutshell, like what do you guys do if someone was asking?
Yeah, basically, it is essentially a customer service rating system for community members to provide direct feedback about their experiences with police officers. And the way that it's different than other tools that have been put out before is, number one, it's built by cops for cops, so to speak. Right. My original partner is also, he's still active law enforcement. So we built it with good intentions, right? So not every tool is built with good intentions. That's one thing that people obviously have to be aware of. There's a lot of technology in the space. Sometimes it's not always with the right intentions. And we didn't build it to be pro-police, we built it to provide useful data that doesn't really exist historically. So quick backstory. When I first started, probably when you first started, we used to have productivity worksheets. Police officer, you go out and you would earn points. Hey, if you get a misdemeanor arrest, it's worth this many points. Felony arrest is worth this many points. A traffic ticket is worth this many points. And you would try to get a certain number of points per month, right? Here was the issue. When I was a young guy, again, I was policing my hometown. So that's not why I became a cop, right? Like that wasn't my motivation, those things. So I would go out there and say, well, wait a second. I just settled this dispute between two neighbors. Where are the points for that? Oh, no, you don't get points for that. Okay. So I started to realize there's something missing. Like I'm being my performance is being assessed on all these point-based things, but a lot of how I'm actually spending my time, I'm getting no credit, no recognition, no even awareness that I'm doing those things. But those are things that might be good for the community, and good for our brand, right? Because police departments have a brand.
Customer service.
Every police officer has, exactly. And so every police officer has a chance to represent the brand well or not, and damage the brand or improve the brand, right? And so this idea of like, well, wait a second. If you look at the statistics, I think these are BJA statistics, there's something like 62 million police citizen interactions every year in the United States. 62 million.
That's a lot.
Most people think about police interactions from the show cops. Oh, it's all arrests, traffic accidents.
Yeah.
Right. But we know the reality is most of it's like, hey, I got a flat tire. Hey, excuse me, officer, I'm looking for a restaurant. Can you tell me where to go? Those are the most of the interactions that we have as police officers. But the issue is we've done damage to ourselves because we haven't collected that data in a meaningful way. So let's say you helped that lost tourist and you did a great job. You're professional, polite, etc. No one's ever going to hear about that. You get no credit for that. Not until you arrest somebody, right? Does it suddenly get a paper trail, etc. Right. And now that's on paper. So what we thought was, well, wait a second, let's open up that feedback loop way wider. So that anybody that interacts with the police can say, hey, that officer, was very polite or not polite or whatever the case may be. And what we found, and every officer starts by like, oh man, people aren't going to be fair. They're going to trash me. They don't want to get a ticket, so they're going to be mean. What's so beautiful about this is that we keep it real simple. It's 1 through 5 star survey, just like an Uber ride, right? So it's real quick, real easy for people to give a feedback, right? But what we found is in line with the procedural justice research, which is how you treat people, like the process, is more important than the outcome. All the research tells us that. We basically said, let's put it to the test. Let's ask people. Okay, so we got all these police departments with officers handing out these cards saying, hey, at the end of our interaction, you can give me a score, this Guardian score, right? And so then community members go in, give them a score, and we're able to see, because people can leave a comment. So we'll see, this is real stuff. People will go in and the officer will get 5-star rating, right? And it's all questions about procedural justice, like, did the officer explain why they made the stop? How fair was the officer? All those types of things.
Right.
5 questions. Then in the comments, we'll see people say, I didn't feel like I should have gotten the ticket, but the officer did treat me fine.
Yeah.
That's procedural. That is what the research tells us, which is it's not about the outcome, which is the ticket. Oh, yeah, no one wants to get a red light. No one wants to get a traffic ticket, right? Yeah. That's the outcome. The outcome, yeah, it might be negative. What we found is the process, or how you treat the person up until then, is actually what defines their perception of the interaction. So they're still on average, pretty honest. They'll be like, yeah, Michael was professional. I'll give him 5 stars. And they'll wait to complain about the ticket until the comments section.
Right.
So the bottom line is most departments actually get pretty good scores because so many people are given the opportunity to give feedback. And it's what we would expect, which is most police interactions are usually positive, right? Like we jade ourselves by thinking about all the negativity, but actually most of it, you walk into a 7-Eleven and you chat with someone for 10 minutes while you're getting coffee. That's a positive interaction. That's an actual interaction that counts, right? So that's what we do. We're trying to give that data to police leaders so they can really see a bigger picture of how their officers are interacting with community members beyond just the stats of like arrests, tickets, et cetera, but also just like, what's the customer service skills that your officers have? And then if there's a problem, they can correct it, right? Oh, this guy's trending low, high, whatever. You see your role models and you see people that might need a little bit of help or coaching, and the data tells you that.
And what helps is that when you're looking at getting, let's say you're doing an investigation or you're trying to get buy-in, you start to look at those small interactions and those actually add up. It's like John Maxwell talks about he talks more about the leader, how this relates to leadership, but he talks about like every time you do a positive interaction as a leader with another person, it's like depositing money into a bank.
Yes.
So you keep dropping money in there because at some point you're going to have to do something negative or something that's not going to be like just accept it right away. And then when you pull from that bank, you still have money in there. But if you don't start putting that money in there early, then when you have to take a deposit, there's nothing there. So kind of like when it comes to customer service, like we're not always understanding how many positive interactions that we're having because we're not testing out, oh, we got a cup of coffee. That's not going to be on a call for service. That's not going to be something you've been dispatched to. You going to get lunch from the Chick-fil-A, that's not going to be on the dispatch. A lot of times, like, don't tell anybody I was here because I just had. But you know what I mean? Like those are things that are important because when you're trying to get buy-in from the community at the meetings or the events, you want to be able to show them stats from Guardian Score saying, hey, just let you guys know, we've done these surveys and this is what it's telling us. It's saying that Officer Smith is taking care of business. So that's why we put him as your community liaison. And communities that they're like, you know what? We like the fact that Guardian Score took these customer service ratings and you guys are also understanding the small interactions that are going on too, because you're right. If there's negative things going on, you should know that too before a major call happens. You're projecting or you're looking at the land before it hits the fan. Like if you start getting these customer service ratings that it's like, hey, the ticket was bad and he was an a-hole, and you get it from the same officer, you're just like, oh man, this is leading to lawsuits. This is leading to litigations. This is leading to something bad happening to that officer because the community is going to turn sometimes before you recognize it. But with something like you guys, it makes sense because you're hitting even the small intricacies that a major call won't calculate. Because you're right, like with the productivity sheet you were talking about, if you're only measuring arrest, how are you measuring when you went and kept the domestic violence from becoming an arrest? Like, and that's not measured. And with the customer service ratings, that's actually being measured. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's that way to reinforce the concept of procedural justice. So it's one thing to send your team to a training on procedural justice. Well, okay, but what about after the training? How are you positively reinforcing what you just trained on in procedural justice? And by doing something like this, it helps to say, hey, not only did we want you to get trained on it, but we're going to show you through management
Right.
and performance evaluations, this matters to us. We are going to reinforce this. We're going to double down on procedural justice. Yes, this is our expectation of you as an employee, and you're going to get rewarded for it. So it's not punitive, where you're going to get rewarded for it if you excel in it, right? So a lot of cops start out afraid because everyone's afraid when they get rated, right? It can be very scary, which is natural. But then beautiful things happen once people start to realize, like, oh, wait a second, I'm getting good scores. People like it's working. Me being nice to people is working. And we found that luckily, because of the way we structure the questions, most people, unless again, they're having a mental health crisis or they're really intoxicated, most people are pretty honest. Like on average, they're pretty much just straight up like, yeah, that officer's pretty nice. And luckily, there's almost all the people get pretty good scores, which helps a leader because they can really say, okay, I don't have a bunch of mean jerks on my department. I can focus on, these are my role models and these are some folks that I need to work with. And to your point, early, you get that stuff very early before it gets out of hand. And hopefully you could be corrected. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of people. You could work on that with people.
Train
Those are
them up.
skills. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm always about training people, and studies will show that it's better to train the people you have versus keep hiring new ones because you're paying overtime or you're trying to do the hiring process. And no, just if your people are having issues with communication specifically, train them. Go send them the trainings, like work on that. And it's almost like you're doing a 360 assessment, but you're doing it kind of more of a broad sense with that person. Like you're using community as the answer. So if, like you said, they're rating, like if you keep seeing a certain officer come up, good or bad, that kind of gives you an idea as a chief of police or the sheriff or a director or whatever, like, hey, this is a common trend on either side. Maybe this person that does really well in the community, maybe he or she we should be looking at them for a leadership role. Or that person that keeps getting complaints, maybe we should kind of figure out what kind of training to put them in before let's spend $1,000 to go send him to go do some kind of training at this course before he costs us 25 grand because he done cursed somebody out and now we got to write him some check or something like that. Because it happens.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Yeah. So Burke, as we are going to round out because we're right at our mark. If people were looking for you, where would they find you at?
I'm extremely active on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So just if people want to look me up, Burke Brownfeld, I'm very responsive there, very active. I love to talk about empathy and personal safety and leadership and all types of fun stuff like that. So feel free to reach out. Happy to chat.
Okay. Hey, y'all heard it. Go to LinkedIn, find him. He is very responsive. Trust me. That's how we connected. And I think you guys know at this point, that's how I connect with most of my guests that are on here is through LinkedIn. It's been a very powerful platform. And no, I don't get endorsed to boost them up, but I just like the platform in general. And it has produced great people like Burke and people I've been able to introduce. So if you don't have LinkedIn, which I know some of you don't, go sign up, go get yourself an account. It's free. Put your name in there, put a nice headshot, uniform or not, it don't matter. Just don't put it like you holding a beer or nothing like that. But go on there. It's a professional network, and it's 9 times out of 10. I usually see a lot of posts that are positive. I think LinkedIn does a good job of actually blocking out negative things, like extremely negative. So that it's kind of different from the other platforms that are out there. Some platforms promote it. LinkedIn does not. They want a professional setting. And if you guys are looking for Burke on that, he's definitely there. Burke, what final words do you have for the audience?
Man, final words. Those are tough to say. All I can really say is that, especially if you're a police officer, it's the same thing I tell frontline security staff too. Every interaction is an opportunity. Every interaction you have in life is an opportunity to impact someone positively, whether you use empathy or whatever you want to use. But when you start to think about your daily interactions that way, and you might have 500 interactions a day, small micro interactions, right? You buy coffee, you buy this, you buy that, you walk past someone, with their dog. If you think of it as an opportunity, and so instead of just passing it by and you say, hello, you might have made that person's day. You might have impacted them positively. And you can't overlook that, especially as a police officer. Man, there's so many interactions and therefore so many opportunities to have a positive impact.
Every interaction is an opportunity, guys. It's really and I love the simplicity because it's true. Every single one, and it's always up to us. Even if we go to a bad call for service or we go to something that's leaning towards a direction that's going to be bad, it's still an opportunity for us as people outside of the uniform, inside the uniform, to leave our mark in a positive way, because we can always dictate that. I've always been a big proponent of you always dictate two things: your appearance and your attitude. And when I say appearance, that doesn't mean you got to dress up in a suit, but you can make sure like your hair's brushed, or you can make sure your shirt's ironed, you can make sure that you look some kind of neat. And then your attitude, something that you can control. I know we have bad days, and sometimes you need to go take that 10 seconds to go take a breather, or hey, if you're having that bad of a day, try to take the day off, whatever. But we always have the chance to control our interactions with the people we deal with. And he's right. Burke is 100% right. It is an opportunity to be that positive person that you're supposed to be. Like, that's, if you're in a uniform, more than likely at some point in your life, you said you wanted to help people. At some point, you had to say it. Like, you can't say it's for the paycheck. I mean, you might say it's for the benefits, because most law enforcement has good like health and eye care and stuff like that. But you can't really say it's for the money, because most of us aren't getting paid like corporate rates. And you have to have that love for people to overcome some of that. So even if you're kind of like, oh, I hate citizens right now, there's somewhere inside of you that still likes them and loves them. So once again, make sure that every interaction is an opportunity for you to be respectful, to have dignity, not just for them, but for yourself.
Sure. Yeah, man. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. You guys, obviously, we always want you to be safe, and make sure if you ever need anything from myself or Burke, you know how to find us: LinkedIn, YouTube, email, website, whatever it might be. But we're always here to help, because we want to promote this industry as much as we can. So thank you guys once again. You guys be safe and have a great day.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.